Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. My name is Talani.
And I'm IBK, and you are on Building Your Wealth with Talani and IBK.
You sound like a TV show.
Yeah.
All right, before we get into the topic of today, which is going to be about the current state of the financial market and how that affects you. So before we get into the video, if you're not subscribed to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We try to post videos, we post videos every week. And we're really just here to share our knowledge on wealth building, investing, real estate, all money talks, everything under that umbrella. So make sure you subscribe if you want more of these videos. And also we have a private mentorship group. And it's kind of just a spot for more intimate conversations. We do videos tailored specifically for members in that group, and also exclusive videos. It's also a great community of like-minded people that are kind of going through or trying to achieve the same goal, if that makes sense. So definitely check that out. I'll put the details and how you can join in the description box below.
In the last video, we said we were going to do a word of the week.
Word of the week. What's the word of the week today? We
are going to talk about equity.
Equity.
And equity is a term that is used everywhere. Like you hear equity. Like what does it really mean? And it's actually very simple. Equity refers to the ownership interest in a property or a company or anything else. Let's say you buy a house for 5% down, right? You put 5% of your own money and the rest is financed by the bank.
Yeah.
You have a 5% ownership interest in that house and the bank has a 95. As you keep putting your own money and paying off the bank, your equity interest in the house grows and the bank's equity interest reduces till when you pay that house off, now you have majority of the ownership interest or all the ownership interest in the house or all the equity, 100% equity, and the bank has zero. Same thing applies to stocks. So every stock or company that is publicly traded has a total number of stocks issued that are traded on the public market. And people have opportunity to buy a percentage of that stock float that is out there. So if you have 100 shares of Apple, then you have 100 over the total number of float stock units available on the market. But that is kind of down to earth definition of equity.
All right, let's get into the actual topic of the day.
All right, so I wanted to make this video because there's a lot of stuff going on right now. If you turn on the news or you're listening to anything that is financial related, you're going to be hearing things about debt ceiling discussions, interest from the high interest rate environment, tightening of lending standards, slowing economy.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of use this opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into those and, shed some light on some of the underlying issues that are causing those discussions. So you've heard about the debt ceiling, and I will start off with a little definition of the debt ceiling. It's an arbitrary cap that is set by Congress on the total amount of money that the federal government is allowed to borrow to fund its operations.
Okay.
And so when we talked about bonds in our last video, the government issues bonds constantly.
Okay.
Why does the government issue bonds? Because the income they get from tax revenue is not enough to finance all the obligations that they have. And so they need to raise money. And so they were like, okay, we're trying to raise $5 billion. And you have opportunity to buy units and we will give you a 3% interest rate. In reality, let me back up a second. They can say the way it works out is we'll give you $30 for every $1,000 you invest. How much money are you going to raise? $30 every month. I'm just throwing out a number. And so people bid for those and you do a capital raise for that bond. And for that total amount raised, the government is going to pay them $30 per $1,000 raised. Back in the day, when we used to try to run a balanced budget, they only raised bonds for capital expenditures. Oh, we wanted to build a new bridge. Let's raise money to do that. Oh, we're going to war. You would have war bonds to fund the war. All that good stuff. This is kind of tied to some of the stuff we've been talking in the past where we were tied to the gold standard and there was a cap on the amount of money. Now we are more debt-based. And so the way it works is right now, the government cannot fund all its obligations without being able to borrow more money. And that debt ceiling has been set by Congress. And so you have this back and forth, and it's now used as a political football to play because you need to raise this debt ceiling. If not, the US is going to default on this debt, and which means like parks will need to be closed. Government workers need to be furloughed because there's no money to pay them.
Yeah. All
the bad stuff that comes with that. And the US government is becoming one of the highest employers, as the biggest employers in the country today. So going forward, they need this money to finance, government spending. And since we've been running, I think the last time we run surplus, which means we spent less than we actually brought in, was 2002 under Clinton. And so we've constantly had to raise the debt ceiling to continue to fund operations. And so now, because the U.S. is being looked globally as a safe haven, we have rule of law here, we have property ownership rights, which are like embedded in our Constitution and things like that. Everybody looks to U.S. government bonds as a safe haven. Mm-hmm. If we get into a position where we start to default on our debt, that can really, really shake the confidence that the global economy looks at the U.S. for. And so we are in this predicament where, since the ceiling is set by Congress, you have the two factions of the political sphere going back and forth to determine what should be financed or approved in this new debt ceiling raise. Mm-hmm. So that's the discussion there going on. And right now, it looks like we're going to hit that limit sometime in June. We're recording this in May 23. Sometime it's anticipated middle to end of June of 23, we'll hit that limit. And if we don't have a resolution, we might have a technical default on debt. The other item that is fueling a lot of this is the higher interest rates. As a lot of you are aware, since about March last year, the Fed, which is the central bank of the United States, has been raising the target interest rate almost every month continuously since March of 2022. Yeah. And what that means is it has been slowly increasing the cost of borrowing for everybody. As you have seen it in mortgage rates going high, credit card rates higher, everything is higher, right? And the Fed and the Treasury, which is operated by the government, it's meant to be an independent entity. There's been a lot of debt that has been raised over the past, 10 to 15 years, where after the global financial crisis, if the Fed cut interest rates down to zero, and it's been on the zero bound for the last 13 years. Only last year did they start really trying to raise rates. Yeah. They tried a little bit in 2018, but the markets didn't like that, and so they had to cut it back down. So people have been used to this low rate environment over time, and there have been a lot of bonds that have been issued at these lower rates. Yeah. Some of these instruments have been loans for housing, loans for commercial real estate. All of those have been issued at those low interest rates. Now, let's take commercial real estate, for example. You do not get 30-year fixed loans for commercial real estate. Those typically tend to be refinanced every 5 years. Yeah. And so we are getting to a point where those lower rate debt instruments that have been secured are going to be needed to be refinanced sometime this year or next year at the higher interest rates. Yeah. At the same time, the amount of revenue that these companies are getting from their operations, for example, office space. Yeah. There's a lot more people are working from home than they used to. And, even though COVID is officially over, we are still about 50% of the occupancy we had pre-COVID, which tells us that the same amount of people who used to use office space back in the day, we're probably not going to be getting to that for a while. Which means the rent collected by the owners of this massive buildings in downtown and, commercial real estate operations are going to be collecting less rent. And now their rental income is reducing and they will have to refinance at these higher interest rates, which will really squeeze their margin and maybe put some of them in a loss. Some of them have been, coming out already, which I think from Blackstone, they gated their fund, and some other like investors have just turned the keys back to the banks and be like, we can't afford to hold this property anymore.
Oh, wow.
And so that is a source of tension that a lot of people have been paying attention to because of these higher interest rates. And the longer the Fed holds rates this high or keeps increasing, the more and more loans get to be refinanced at these higher interest rates, which would cause more credit tightening as we've had. So I've also been hearing about tighter credit standards from the banks. I don't know if you've tried to get a mortgage out recently, but it is hard. Like, banks are asking for a lot of stuff, and the criteria to get a loan now is harder than it's ever been. Part of it has been because of the bank failures we've had over the last couple months. And the reason for the bank failure, just a small summary, is when we put our money in the banks, they take our money and invest it on the back end and collect a spread, right? So they know that we can pull our money out at any point, but the hope is that you just keep your money in the bank. And so they invest that. And so during the times of low interest rates, banks had the opportunity to go invest in like government treasuries, mortgage-backed securities, all that good stuff. And those were low interest rate periods. But now that interest rates are higher, the value, so let's give an example now. Let's say we do $30 every 6 months, okay? So that's $60 a year for every $1,000. So that's 6%, right? So now we increase the rates from the 6% to 12%. That bond doesn't just go away. It just means that now to get 12% on your $1,000, the value of that $1,000, which you invested originally, has to drop to make that $30 every 6 months worth 12% now. Does that make sense? So now the value of those bonds that the banks invested in are now worth a lot less, and people were starting to pull their money out.
I see.
Which meant that they needed to sell those bonds at a lower value to meet the obligations of the people who were withdrawing their money, because you can withdraw your money at the bank from at any point. So what this led to was you had this mismatch between the money that people actually had in the bank and the value of the investments that the banks had. And so by the time they sold everything, it was very obvious that they're not going to be able to make it. And so that's why a lot of these banks failed. So because of that, that has really shaken the confidence in a lot of people, especially big businesses. And they're trying to pull their money out of the banks because the banks are paying very small interest on those when you can just go buy a bond at a higher interest rate there. So because of that, there's a lot of shakiness in the banks, and banks are not as willing to make loans to individuals because of the fear of, you don't know when people are just going to pull their money out and then you're stuck holding the bag. And so because of the banks being less willing to lend, it means that businesses are not going to get the type of, like, the number of loans or the value of loans that they're used to getting in the past. And business lending is what drives the economy. So you realize that more than 50% of the people who are employed in the US are employed by small to medium businesses, right? And so if credit is no longer being extended to businesses, it means that, okay, we're not gonna get credit, so we can't really grow. We need to focus on profitability. And so how do you focus on profitability? You cut your expenses because you can't grow into what you need. And that's why you're getting a lot of the layoffs, and businesses are looking for opportunity to cut costs to get the profitability because they don't have access to the capital that they used to have in order to grow. And so because there's going to be layoffs, you're going to get people without jobs, which are not going to consume, which is going to slow business down, and it's going to have this spiral potentially into a recession.
And there's been a lot of layoffs recently. Almost every industry I'm seeing.
Correct. And so I'm bringing this up because these are like the hot topics of the time right now, and we just need to pay attention and watch how things play out and set yourself in the best position to be able to weather through a potential economic turbulent time that we
Yeah.
might be coming up against.
It's rough out here.
I hope this video has been very informational. If there are any questions about things that have been covered, please let me know. For our paid subscribers, I will be going into specific videos on each of the topics I just discussed today and providing a lot more detail there.
Yes.
So that's your incentive to subscribe to the membership page.
Yes, join the membership.
All right. Have a good one, guys.
All right, thank y'all so much for watching. Catch y'all in the next video. Bye.
Bye.